What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another chess lesson, and in this video we are going to be talking about piece development. So what exactly does development even mean? Well, development is a term that people use in the opening to essentially say whenever you are making your first few opening moves, what you want to do is you want to set up your army, all of your pieces in general, to be the most effective. Now, by effective, I mean you want to position your pieces where they have the greatest attacking power, and not only that, but you want to keep in mind that you're trying to build a nice, solid defense as well, so you don't have any major vulnerabilities. So, sounds great. How do we do that? Well, before I go any further, I just want to point out that there are probably 7 billion different opening strategies. If you ever typed in chess opening, which I'm sure all of you guys have researched chess openings in, one regard or the other, you probably know that there are so many different strategies on the best chess opening. I'm not going to debate what the best one is or why. Some of them focus more on the attacking, some of them focus more on the defense. In this video, I just want to stick with the basic principles that kind of relate to all chess openings. And that way, whenever you're studying a specific opening, it's going to make a lot more sense to you. So we'll go over the basic concepts in this video, and I'll explain why I'm doing each move. And then, like I said, if you want to study a specific opening, then you can, search for a video on that. So what we talked about last time is the two most popular opening moves in chess are pawn to e4 and pawn to d4. And this is mainly because whenever you move, let's say, to e4, this pawn is going to control two valuable central squares. So that means it's going to allow for your pieces to move there since it's protected, and it also prevents the enemy from moving their pieces out here unless it's, they're just going to be gobbled up. Now, in addition to this specific opening move, the reason that e4 is popular as well is because, as you can see, whenever you bump up this pawn from e2 to e4, it also opens up a lane for your queen and your bishop. Because if you were to play from this starting position, right now you cannot attack the enemy king at all. I mean, none of these pieces can even move off their back rank besides your knights, and the best that they can do is go to one of these squares. So that is why the two most common moves are e4 and d4 to open up lanes for the minor pieces and also to control the center. Now, Black's response, we'll just stick with the engine right here. They're going to respond by going to e6. Now, again, they're going to try to do the same thing that we're trying to do. They want to allow for their minor pieces to have nice open lanes, and also they want to control their fair share of the center as well. So they want to develop their enemy camp, which I guess it isn't an enemy from their point of view, but they want to develop their army most effectively just like we do. Now, after pawns, people typically choose to develop their knights. Now, again, we saw in the last video, you want to develop your knights towards the center of the board. Your knight on the edge of the board is not nearly effective as if it were in the center of the board. And by center, I don't only mean these 4 central squares, but also these ones as well. I'm not going to highlight them all, but these ones around the 4 central ones as well. So with a knight here, this specific move, the reason I chose this is because not only is it developed towards the center, but we also are developing this knight with an attack. So as you can see, Black's, since it's their turn to move, if they don't respond by protecting this piece right here, then we can just go ahead and capture it the next turn. So again, what we're doing is we're really limiting the amount of options that Black has in their development. So say they wanted to bring their bishop out here, maybe try to attack this pawn. Well, now they can't, because if they do, then they would just lose a pawn. So in knights, develop them towards the center where they're the most effective, and consider developing them with an attack. Now, we'll just say that, again, we'll stick with the engine for this tutorial. We'll say that Black takes its knight and moves it out to c6. Again, this is going to be protecting this pawn on e5 and also controlling this central square, so we can't just take our pawn or any other piece and move it out here. Now, eventually, you are going to have the option of deciding where you want to develop your bishops. Now, bishops are actually one of the most trickiest pieces to decide where you want to, put them in your opening, because they don't have one perfect square to go to. There are a couple general things you want to look out for. First of all, you want to get this bishop off the back rank. Now, the main reason for that is I'm just going to put it on b5 right now. Whenever you have your knight off the back rank and you also have your bishop off the back rank, and I'm talking about your kingside bishop and kingside knight, what you can do is this allows for kingside castling. And we'll talk about castling later on, but that's one reason you want to get your bishop and knight off the back rank early. Another thing that you want to do is, we saw in the last video, getting your bishop towards the center or developing it towards the center of the board allows it to be most effective. In its starting position, the number of squares it can attack is rather limited, but when it's in the center of the board or more towards the center, it has a bigger range of attack. It's more effective. Now, another key point to note is whenever I develop this bishop is also being developed with an attack on this knight right here. So black is probably going to want to take this pawn and move it out to, let's say, d6 is a pretty natural position for it. In that case, we can just do that right now. Now, our bishop is going to be pinning this knight on c6 because this knight, later on, it first has to solve the problem of what to do with our bishop before it can move, because if it moves right now, then we would just take the king. It actually isn't even legally allowed to move right now, but that's what would happen. Now, another consideration that I want to take note of is eventually, if I just go back a few steps, whenever we talk about pawn structure, we're going to point out some more of these details, but whenever you're developing your bishop, you want to consider developing it before moving out your pawns that would eventually block it in. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, if instead of moving out our bishop on turn 3, we decided that we just want to reinforce our pawn on e4 by bringing out our pawn to d3, well then our bishop is blocked in. So then we either need to take it out here and maybe move this pawn up so it can get an escape square, or we can just keep it on the back rank for the entire game, which isn't the greatest. So that's another thing I want to point out. Whenever developing your bishops, you want to consider moving them out so they're essentially outside the pawn chain. Now, I already mentioned that whenever we have our kingside knight developed and also our kingside bishop developed, and by that I just mean off the back rank, it allows for our king to castle. Now, we're going to be talking about castle in detail in an upcoming video, but basically, you guys already know what it means, I'm sure. Moving your king 2 spaces over towards the corner and moving your rook one side on the opposite side of the king. And what this does is it helps your king be protected, which is always good, and it also helps your rook develop, move to a better square. Now, in our opening, where do we want our rooks? Well, eventually, rooks are going to want to go on an open file. And by open file, I mean a file where there aren't any pawns blocking it. Because let's say we move our rook right here. Well, it doesn't really matter where we move our rook at this point in the game, because it's always going to be blocked by one of our pawns. And of course, it can't just hop over them. So rooks are kind of more useful whenever the game opens up. And by that, I mean whenever some of the pieces are cleared out, captured, and there's just a lot more space on the board for them to maneuver around. But eventually, we're going to want our rooks on open files or files that are soon to be open. So if you suspect that these 2 pawns are going to be traded off soon, well, that means that this file is going to be a very effective place for us to move our rook, because it's going to be then attacking the king. So in this opening, actually the preferred place for the rook to move is actually e1. So now we'll castle and we'll say that black will just move its bishop to e7. Now from here, again, let's just say that we want to get our rook and move it out to e1, because we suspect that this file is going to be opening soon. And another point that I want to make is whenever you're deciding to develop your rooks, another thing that is beneficial is to have your rooks on the same file. And this is called having double rooks or connected rooks. So whenever your 2 rooks are essentially on the same rank or the same file, then that means that they are protecting each other. Because if a piece from black captures one, then the other rook can just recapture it. So always consider having your rooks on the same rank or the same file. Now again, this applies more in the endgame when these rooks are actually going to do a bit more attacking. But for right now, what we want to do is we actually want to keep our rooks on the back rank, and that is just to help protect our king. Now, another point I want to make about development is you're probably going to hear this a lot as well. Do not bring your queen out into the game too early. And that is because even though it's the most powerful piece, and I know a lot of you guys are probably just itching to get it out, grandmasters advise this, and you probably heard this suggestion a lot before, and it's because whenever your queen is in the center of the board, it's going to be the number one target. And the last piece that you need to consider, or maybe the first piece, I don't know, depends how you look at it. The last piece that I need to talk about is, of course, the king. Now, the king, where should this go in your opening? Where should it go when you're deciding where to develop your initial pieces during your first couple moves? You want to get the king in the safest area possible, and that is generally in a corner of the board, protected by pawns and a minor piece. So these pawns right in front of your king, you typically do not want to move at all. The job of these pawns is just to protect your king. Now, this fortress is actually a pretty common setup that you see with 3 pawns in front of the king and also a minor piece helping to hold down the fortress as well. So again, with your king, you want to get it to the safest, most well-protected area of your camp, which is usually in the corner of the board. So those are some of the basic principles for piece development. Again, where you want your pawns, where you want your knights, where you want your bishops, how you want your rooks developed. Make sure to protect your king and don't bring out your queen so early. Now, with those concepts in mind, I encourage you to go and research some specific chess openings, which talk about exactly how to move your pieces, in what order, and the precise squares that these pieces belong on. And when reading those ideas are now going to make a lot more sense. But for now, as always, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next video.